Welcome to the Inclusiveship Show, the place to get practical insights to make inclusion happen in the business world. My name is Thais Compuan. I'm a host, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be here with Asif Sadiq. Asif Sadiq is the head of diversity and inclusiveness for EY Financial Services UK. Asif is a multiple award-winning diversity and inclusion expert. He was previously the head of Equality, Diversity and Human Rights Unit for the City of London Police. Asif received an MBE, which means Member of British Empire, on the Queen's Birthday Honour for his contributions to the diversity field. And Asif is also currently a special sergeant within the City of London Police. Asif, thank you so much for being my guest today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And my first question for you, Asif, is how do you define inclusion and diversity?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think it varies from place to place and in different areas. But for me, diversity is really about understanding the differences that people have, and inclusion is about making those differences work. As you're aware, at EY we use inclusiveness because it's more broader. It covers more people. Inclusion itself can sometimes be limiting to including an individual into a group, but inclusiveness is more broader. Interestingly, the sort of dictionary definition of inclusiveness is the quality of covering or dealing with a range of subjects or areas. So in that sense, it makes it much broader and really, truly inclusive.
Great. And what's the most effective, what's your killer argument to convince people of the value of inclusiveness and diversity?
I think for me, it has to be the business benefits. But when we talk about business benefits, I think it's breaking that down into various different areas. So number one, there's a commercial benefit, which I think everyone is quite well aware of, that having diversity or diverse teams that think differently generates more business because you're coming up with new and innovative ideas. So that's one element of it. And I think the second commercial benefit, which sometimes is missed, is the whole notion around recruitment, retention, and progression, right? So having inclusion ensures people stay longer, people progress within the organization, and that in itself has a commercial benefit, because if you can't retain your staff or the best of your staff, you end up losing a lot of money. So there's two angles. There's the direct commercial benefit of diverse teams that think differently. And then there's the internal element of having diverse teams. But I guess the key thing is it's about the diversity, not just of how people look, but the thought processes that different people from different backgrounds, different cultures bring with them.
I guess these are very good arguments, as if to convince people at a head level, isn't it? Is there any tricks that you use to get people's attention from a heart perspective?
Of course.
How to engage people's hearts when it comes to inclusion and diversity?
No, definitely. I think for me, one of the key things is that making everyone understand that we all have differences, right? And we all have something we bring to the inclusion agenda. Because I am mindful that certain groups of people sometimes will assume that diversity is just about certain groups or certain individuals, when it's not. So everyone has something that makes them different, and that they can bring to the inclusion agenda. So it's celebrating all those differences, no matter how small or big, and ensuring everyone has that voice. And I think that's where people buy in. When people see that, oh, okay, we're all different, or we all bring something. And you'll find, and this is my personal experience, and probably yours as well, that everyone will have some characteristic, or they'll know someone, or would have had some experiences which will make them different and diverse. And if they feel they can bring that, then they feel they can align to the whole agenda, and then that's where you win the hearts and the minds of people when they feel included themselves.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Asif. And I remember once I was in a conference and there was a person, a male guy, white guy. It's like in appearance, there was nothing that made him different, from the majority. But
Yeah.
he wanted to speak up because he said that he was part of an American group, and although he spoke English without a foreign accent, he was born and raised in an Eastern European country at the time, still the time of communism. And he felt different about that, and he felt sometimes a fraud because he didn't feel free to reveal that the aspect of his identity. And that was what he liked the most about inclusion initiatives. It gave him the freedom to be himself somehow, even though he didn't look like somebody who would benefit from an inclusion and diversity strategy.
And I think that's one of the biggest points as well. It's not just the visible differences, it's other differences that people have that sometimes are not visible that we can miss out on, but are part of the whole diversity agenda and inclusion as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's the most common objection that you get, Asif? And how do you respond to it, when it comes to I&D?
So I think one of the most common things I've come across is where, there's a perception that maybe I&D is aimed at certain individuals or it excludes others. So that's one of the things I'm really, really mindful of. And for me, the key thing is that, well, actually, the whole agenda is about including everyone. And, it's about leveling the playing field, so giving everyone access to the same opportunities rather than giving someone a sort of added advantage. So that comes up quite often. And the other argument, interestingly, which I still hear pockets of, not so much, but still comes up, is diversity not sitting within the main sort of arena of our business or the broader business. So I'm again very mindful that diversity is core to every element of what we do. From recruitment to all the way to our sort of teams that we set up. Every element has an element of diversity.
Okay. And actually, a very common objection that I get is people saying that inclusion and diversity initiatives, they go against the meritocracy principle. Do you have anything to answer to that?
So, I mean, I think that perceptions get formed if diversity and inclusion is not delivered in the right way. And this is where it's about being transparent, ensuring people have a broader understanding of why we're doing diversity and inclusion, why it's important to the business, and what we're trying to achieve. I think that then results in a good understanding. And then people don't form perceptions or opinions, which then become their reality if they spend too long thinking about it.
Okay. And in your opinion, what is the most effective way to deal with non-inclusive behaviors?
So I think for me, one of the things I found very, very powerful is experiential learning. And what I mean by experiential learning is I think classroom-based training programs are good, and of course they have a place. But I think to really change behaviors, it's where you give someone an experience that makes them see the other side. And these experiences can be, numerous different things, or can be, delivered in so many different ways. But just to give you a very quick example, when I was still in the police service, we were criticized a lot for stopping, as you're probably aware in the UK, if you're black, you're 14 times more likely to be stopped by the police. So because of that, we had this real divide, and we wanted to train our officers to ensure that, the unconscious bias and all those elements are not there. So what we did, we set up 6-a-side football teams with young black men on the states that we were policing. And the police set up these 6-a-side football teams, and they played football together. But what that did was it gave each group an experience of the other, which was a real life experience. And that actually resulted in a massive drop in the amount of, young black boys being stopped, or even police officers not understanding the community. So it was through the experience that we changed the agenda. But before we brought in the experience, there was this real sort of resistance because of this perception that, you're calling one group racist or, things like that. So I think any form of experiential learning And that's just one example, but you could have an experience of a cultural experience, or, a diversity experience of some sort. That really makes people, I think it really makes people understand how challenging it can be.
And on your journey, have you made any mistakes, in the promotion of inclusion and diversity that you wouldn't, that you would really recommend people not to do? What can we learn from your mistakes on your journey promoting inclusion and diversity?
I think I think we all make mistakes, and I think I probably still make mistakes up until today. But I think the key thing I've learned, if there's one thing I learned around the diversity agenda, is that there's so many different opinions, there's so many different views, and one of the things I tend to do is I've learned that we'll not always agree, or there'll be different views even to my ideas, but it's accepting that and understanding that everyone will perceive things in a different way has probably helped me, because it's very difficult sometimes, because you become so passionate about diversity and inclusion that you sometimes don't see the other side. So my experiences have just taught me to, although we champion this from a inclusion and diversity perspective, but sometimes to just be a bit more open to see some of the resistance which comes through.
Okay. And what was the most valuable piece of advice that anyone has ever given to you in this field?
I think for me, it was probably to do what I believe is right, and to believe in myself as well. So not to conform to any norms within this area, but to be challenging and to bring my own unique perspective, which sometimes is difficult because it's not the way others work. But it's to keep your uniqueness, because that's what makes, diversity and inclusion so interesting.
And which piece of advice would you give to anyone starting this journey or refreshing, an inclusion in diversity strategy in their organizations?
I think, so for me, the key advice to anyone would be, don't get stuck on terminology. Look at what we need to achieve. I find a lot of people, get hung up on how to, like in the UK, whether we should call, if you look at ethnicity, whether it should be BME, BAME, Black, people of color, all these things come up. When what ends up happening is we spend so much time trying to look at the definition that we don't do anything to actually support the agenda. So, we need to focus more on what we need to achieve rather than the terminology. Similarly, with LGBT, you've got LGBTQ now, and there's different definitions of that as well. Really important, but let's do the doing rather than focusing so much on the terminology. And structural wise, or how would you look at a strategy within an organization? We need, or any organization needs, a strategy that has buy-in from everyone. So it's ensuring all stakeholders understand, what we're trying to put forward, but making sure that they're included in the process, because that's where you get true buy-in from.
And there's something that you told me as well, Asif, as we were preparing for this episode, you told me a sentence that I really liked. You said, we have to make sure that the majority doesn't feel like a minority. You said something like this, which is a very powerful sentence, I find.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's one of the most important factors going forward in this area of diversity and inclusion is, as you're aware, and everyone else will be aware, that there's a lot of changing circumstances going on around the world, which is leading to the majority starting to feel like the minority because of certain efforts. So I think the key principle is to ensure the majority don't feel like they're minority and they feel included in the whole D&I agenda, because both of us know that D&I is not possible if we don't have the buy-in of everyone within the organization.
And do you see any other topics trending in the inclusion and diversity space?
Yeah, so interestingly, I was having this discussion in Brussels last week. One of the things which I think is really, really topical, and a lot of companies are starting to explore and look at, is faith and belief and worldviews as well in the workplace. But faith being one of the key topical issues. It's one of the things people tend to not discuss. Tend to move away from.
It's kind of a taboo topic, isn't it?
It is. But if you look at the changing demographics of the world, if you look at, I think I read a report which said 78% of the world aligns themselves to a faith. If you look at international organizations with a international workforce, you will have people of faith. And I think from an inclusion perspective, we need to move the dial on that topic as well. And what I mean by that is it's not the traditional, we need prayer spaces or dietary requirements. It's more along the lines of how do you create an inclusive environment where everyone, including someone of faith, can be themselves.
In speaking about actions, again, Asif, what was the most effective initiative that you've ever taken when it comes to inclusion and diversity?
I think for me, it would probably be working around the experiential learning. And why I go back to that is because I really did find the impact of that massive. And even when, so I actually developed an experiential learning piece, both for our internal staff as well, just to understand the experiences of the other. And I found that very, very impactful. In fact, I've just been doing some work around unconscious bias and the impact of unconscious bias. Because as you're aware, we all do unconscious bias training and realize our biases. But unless we understand the impact of that or experience what it would feel like to be the victim, so to speak, of that bias, it's very difficult to align yourself. So I think experiential learning is probably my top thing for things which I think have worked well and have been challenging. It gets discussions opened. I've turned up at meetings where I'm expected to present, and instead I put them through this vigorous experience of having a honest discussion and debate. That could be an experience, because it is an experience for people to open up and talk about themselves, and that usually doesn't happen, unfortunately, so often in the commercial or business world.
Yeah, so these are the topics everybody are trying to avoid, maybe.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I think,
giving people permission, maybe a safe space to communicate with each other and to have a dialogue.
And to ask questions, because people have so many questions. The amount of times I've been asked about race, but people are so scared, even sort of asking me about my background. People are not sure, how to ask me, what to ask me. Yet I have no issues answering a question if it's asked in a genuine way. But I think that's so. I'm really about giving people the confidence to ask any question, because I don't think there's any wrong question. But it's when people sometimes don't ask and make an assumption. So with myself, a lot of time people will assume that I'm of South Asian, background, but I'm actually from Kenya, born in East Africa. So that's my background, and that shapes a lot of my the way I think and my cultural heritage and so on. But unless you ask, you'll never know. But people form assumptions. So I think it's creating that safe space for people to ask questions. And even if the question is wrong or not worded the right way, it's fine, as long as people are confident in asking.
And the good intention behind, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it makes me think of an experience that I had when I was leading the strategy at Coca-Cola. Yeah. And we put together a kind of an awareness raising activity about ethnicity and culture. And that question was the biggest challenge for everybody was, how do I engage in a conversation about somebody else's cultural heritage? People wanted to know what's the right question and what's the wrong question. And actually, the intention behind is so much important than anything else.
Definitely, because it's you can never get a glossary of terms or anything that you can use, because every person, something that I might find maybe offensive, someone else might not, who might look exactly like me. So it is about I think it's the right intention, and then you can judge how the conversation goes.
Yeah, Asif, it's almost time for us to wrap up, our conversation. And before we leave, I'd like to ask you, do you have a favorite book or a favorite TED Talk when it comes to inclusion and diversity that you could recommend us?
Yeah, so there's quite a few actually. There is a TED Talk which is delivered around being color brave. I now can't remember the lady's name off the top of my head, but it is, if you type in color brave, it will bring up the TED Talk. And it really talks about how we need to talk about the race agenda, and making it beyond the terminology. So very relevant to what we've just discussed. Books, there's probably so many different books which have different opinions, but one of the things which really always resonates with me is a quote, actually, from Albert Einstein around, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will lead its whole life believing it's stupid. And that really, for me, resonates around diversity and inclusion, because we need to ensure we treat people as individuals, but yet are inclusive in our practices to make sure that they can achieve their full success. But if we judge everyone the same and put them through the same, assessments, tests, and treat them the same, we will never have success.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Asif. A very, very inspirational conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thanks everybody for watching or listening to us. If you're listening to this conversation on podcast, I hope you enjoyed it. It would be great to find out, what's your key takeaway from this conversation. You could leave a comment below. If you liked this episode, feel free to like it, to share it, to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to find out more about my work, go to declicinternational.com, DECLIC international.com, and you can also subscribe to my newsletter. I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, embrace differences and make a difference. Bye. Bye, Asif.
Bye.